Here's a wild fact that'll blow your mind. Some of the most beloved films ever made were absolutely buried at the box office when they first dropped. The 1980s specifically, a graveyard of masterpieces that audiences totally slept on. So which year had the biggest financial disaster that turned out to be pure gold? Stick around as we count down every single year of the 80 seconds and discover the films that got robbed by bad timing, studio politics, and audiences who just weren't ready for genius. Big Trouble in Little China, 1986. Kurt Russell and John Carpenter were collaborators throughout the 80s, and Carpenter couldn't catch a break commercially. Big Trouble in Little China cost $25 million and only earned $11.2 million domestically. This is a fantasy action comedy about a truck driver who gets pulled into a magical adventure in San Francisco's Chinatown while trying to rescue his girlfriend. Sounds absurd? That's the entire point. The film is absolutely ridiculous and embraces that completely. Kurt Russell plays it straight the entire time while surrounded by increasingly insane supernatural events. His deadpan delivery makes every ridiculous line land perfectly. The action sequences are inventive and funny. The practical effects are impressive. The production design is colorful and immersive. Critics dismissed it as a failed comedy that didn't understand what it was trying to be. Audiences stayed away because the marketing made it look like a standard action film. What's brilliant, though, is how completely the film has been reevaluated. It's now considered one of Carpenter's best films and proof that he understood exactly what he was doing tonally. Big Trouble in Little China is darkly funny, genuinely inventive, and visually stunning. It's influenced countless action comedies that came after. Yet upon release, it was written off as a box office disaster and a waste of a $25 million budget. Adventures of Baron Munchausen, 1987. Terry Gilliam had already made Brazil, which was a box office flop, but nothing prepared the industry for the absolute financial massacre of Adventures of Baron Munchausen. Columbia Pictures gave Gilliam a $46.7 million budget and watched helplessly as the film lost a reported $38.5 million. This was one of the most expensive box office bombs in cinema history at that point. The film is a gorgeous, imaginative fantasy adventure about an aged baron telling increasingly tall tales that come to life in delirious sequences of surreal filmmaking. It looks like nothing else ever made. The production design is insane. Practical effects everywhere. Hand-painted backdrops. Real locations across multiple continents. Every frame is a work of art. But Columbia Pictures' new CEO had no patience for Gilliam's creative vision. The studio subjected the film to a limited theatrical release and sabotaged the marketing. Gilliam later claimed the entire situation was an act of internal studio politics designed to destroy his career. Yet here's the absolute kicker. The film was nominated for 4 Academy Awards. Critics who bothered to actually watch it recognized it as a masterpiece. The film has become a genuine cult classic with devoted admirers who consider it one of the finest fantasy films ever made. Despite losing nearly $40 million, Adventures of Baron Munchausen is now celebrated as Gilliam's most visually audacious achievement. It's proof that sometimes the greatest art fails commercially because the industry isn't equipped to understand it. Ladyhawke at 1985. Rutger Hauer and Michelle Pfeiffer playing lovers trapped in a curse sounds like the setup for the most beautiful fantasy romance ever made. Ladyhawke proved that was correct. The film cost $20 million and only earned $18 million, losing money, despite being an absolutely gorgeous imaginative adventure. Matthew Broderick rounded out the cast as the comic relief character who teams up with these star-crossed lovers trying to break their curse. The cinematography is absolutely breathtaking. Medieval locations, golden hour lighting, sweeping orchestral scores. Everything about this film screams epic fantasy romance, but audiences just didn't bite. The film arrived at the wrong time in the theatrical marketplace. Coming right after Breakfast Club and Weird Science, audiences wanted 80s teen comedies, not period fantasy. Here's what's incredible, though. Ladyhawke has become a beloved cult classic. People who discover it today are absolutely charmed by its sincerity and commitment to romance. The chemistry between Hauer and Pfeiffer is genuine. The final scene where they're reunited is genuinely one of the most beautiful moments in 80s cinema. Critics have completely reassessed it. It's been reevaluated as a masterpiece of the fantasy genre that deserves to sit alongside The Princess Bride and Legend. Yet at release it was considered box office poison. The King of Comedy, 1983. Martin Scorsese directed The King of Comedy, and it absolutely tanked. The film brought in just $2.5 million against a $19 million budget, making it one of the most catastrophic failures of a Scorsese picture ever made. Robert De Niro plays Rupert Pupkin, an obsessed comedy fan with delusions of grandeur who becomes convinced that a famous late-night television host wants to know him. The film is uncomfortable. That's the point. It makes you squirm watching this sad, delusional man convince himself that the celebrity world wants anything to do with him. Jerry Lewis plays the talk show host and delivers the most serious, dramatic performance of his career. The chemistry between these two actors is absolutely electric, but critics dismiss the film as a weird comedy that didn't land funny. Audiences completely ignored it. What's wild is watching The King of Comedy today and recognizing it as a masterpiece of character study. It sits comfortably with Scorsese's best work like Taxi Driver and Raging Bull. The film's themes about obsession and fame have become even more relevant in our social media age where everyone's got a platform. De Niro's performance should be considered iconic, yet when it released, it was barely noticed. Scorsese felt devastated. Here was a major auteur-director making challenging cinema, and nobody showed up. The film would eventually find an audience through cable television and home video, but its initial failure hurt the industry's perception of what Scorsese could do. Clue, 1984. Clue had everything going for it. The cast was absolutely stacked. Tim Curry, Madeline Kahn, Christopher Lloyd, a faithful adaptation of the beloved board game with genuinely clever writing. The film cost $15 million and barely scraped together $14.6 million at the box office. What makes this failure even crazier is that the studio actually released 3 different theatrical versions of the film with 3 completely different endings. In some theaters, the butler did it. In others, it was the maid. In others, everyone was responsible. This was an actual theatrical experiment, and it should have generated massive word of mouth and repeat viewings. Instead, audiences were confused and stayed away in droves. Critics didn't know what to make of a comedy based on a board game. Nobody expected it to be funny. Nobody expected it to work. But it absolutely does. Tim Curry as Detective Wadsworth is comedic perfection. His verbal delivery is flawless. The screenplay is packed with zingers. The production design captures the film noir aesthetic with lavish sets and beautiful cinematography. Today, Clue is considered a comedy classic and a masterpiece of ensemble timing. It's endlessly rewatchable. Film professors teach it as an example of perfect screenplay structure. Yet at the time, it was a box office catastrophe that seemed destined for obscurity. Blade Runner, 1982. Okay, this one stings. Blade Runner represents the ultimate vindication for a film that audiences absolutely rejected on day one. Ridley Scott's cyberpunk masterpiece cost $30 million and only made $27.6 million at the box office, failing to turn a profit during its theatrical run. Competing against Star Trek II and E.T. during the summer of 1982 was brutal. Opening weekend looked promising at $6 million, but then everything collapsed. Audiences and critics weren't sure what to make of it. Was it science fiction? Film noir? A philosophical meditation on what it means to be human? The answer is yes to all 3, but that complexity wasn't what mainstream audiences wanted back then. They wanted clear heroes and villains. Blade Runner gave them ambiguity and darkness, and Harrison Ford playing a depressed bounty hunter hunting replicants through acid rain-soaked Los Angeles. Fast forward to today, and Blade Runner is considered one of the greatest science fiction films ever made. Its influence on cyberpunk aesthetics is immeasurable. Every neon-drenched dystopian future you see in modern films traces directly back to Blade Runner. Yet it failed so completely that Scott wouldn't direct another original science fiction film for decades. The film's reputation was so damaged by its initial box office failure that it took years of VHS rentals and cable television airings before audiences finally understood its genius. Can't Stop the Music, 1980. This one is legitimately the bomb to beat. Can't Stop the Music hit theaters with all the swagger of a Village People vehicle and absolutely crashed harder than anyone expected. Producer Alan Carr, fresh off his massive success with Grease, threw everything at this. $20 million. A massive marketing push. Celebrity cameos. It didn't matter. The film only scraped together $2 million at the box office, losing a staggering $18 million in the process, and becoming one of the decade's most infamous financial disasters. Here's what makes this brutal, though. The movie actually isn't terrible. Sure, it's dated. The disco era was already fading by 1980. Studios had completely misjudged what audiences wanted anymore. Nobody was interested in more disco fever after Saturday Night Fever had already peaked. But the film is energetic, colorful, and genuinely entertaining if you approach it with the right mindset. The original concept was a documentary about the Village People, which would have been genius. Instead, they went with a fictional musical narrative that felt utterly out of touch with contemporary taste. Carr actually considered this his biggest professional humiliation, but years later, critics and audiences gave it a second look and found a campy charm that's actually pretty enjoyable. It's a reminder that sometimes timing is absolutely everything in Hollywood. Dragonslayer 1981. Paramount Pictures spent $18 million on this dark fantasy epic and watched helplessly as it barely earned $6 to $14 million back. Dragonslayer followed Peter McNichol's young wizard Galen Bradwarden as he prepared to face off against a 400-year-old dragon called Vermithrax Pejorative. Sounds awesome, right? Here's the thing. It absolutely is. The creature design was groundbreaking. Industrial Light and Magic, the special effects powerhouse created by George Lucas, had never worked on a non-Star Wars project before Dragonslayer. That was a massive deal. The dragons looked genuinely menacing and terrifying, unlike anything else audiences had seen in fantasy films up to that point. The movie earned Academy Award nominations for Best Music and Best Visual Effects, proving that critics recognized its technical achievements. But audiences just weren't showing up. Fantasy wasn't having its moment yet. The film was too dark, too expensive, looking too committed to its gritty tone when audiences wanted something more lighthearted and fun. What's wild is that Dragonslayer has become a genuine cult favorite. Modern audiences recognize it as one of the finest dragon movies ever made. The production design is exquisite. The performances carry real weight. Yet, at the time, it was a box office graveyard. Ishtar 19A28. Ishtar is still talked about today as one of the most infamous box office disasters of all time. Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman, two of the biggest movie stars in the world, starred in this comedy about two talentless songwriters who accidentally get involved in Cold War espionage while traveling to Morocco. The budget started at $28 million, but production problems inflated it to $51 million. That was outrageous for 1988. The film earned roughly $17 million at the box office, losing approximately $34 million. Critics absolutely destroyed it. Everyone called it one of the worst movies ever made. Elaine May, one of New Hollywood's most interesting filmmakers, directed it, and the film became a symbol of bloated 80s excess and studio mismanagement. Here's what's absolutely wild, though. Time has been incredibly kind to Ishtar. Recent reassessments by major critics like Richard Brody from The New Yorker have called it among the most original, audacious, and inventive movies and funniest comedies of modern times. The film is actually a droll, winsome satire on United States foreign policy and middle-aged delusion. It was genuinely ahead of its time, and critics' initial viciousness had everything to do with the massive budget overruns and nothing to do with the actual quality. The fact that a female director went drastically over budget seemed to generate way more hostility than when male directors did the same thing. Ishtar deserves so much better than its reputation. The Abyss 1989. James Cameron made The Abyss a science fiction thriller about a diving team encountering something extraterrestrial beneath the ocean's surface. The film cost $50 million and earned $90 million, which sounds successful. Here's the thing, though. By Cameron standards, that was a massive step down from The Terminator and Aliens. The film underperformed expectations so badly that Cameron's studio felt it was a flop relative to his track record. Audiences expected another absolute blockbuster and instead got a slower, more philosophical science fiction film. The underwater cinematography is genuinely innovative. The creature effects are extraordinary. The practical effects sequences where divers are actually doing underwater work create a sense of authenticity you can't fake. Ed Harris plays the lead role with quiet intensity. The film explores themes about communication, marriage, and xenophobia through the lens of Cold War paranoia. What's interesting is that The Abyss has aged beautifully. It's now recognized as a masterpiece of 80s science fiction filmmaking. The extended director's cut, released years later, is even better. Yet at the time, it was considered disappointing and underperforming. Cameron wouldn't make another original science fiction film for years. The financial pressure of The Abyss's perceived failure hung over his career, even though the film is objectively excellent cinema. So, there you have it. 10 years, 10 films. Every single one of them absolutely crushed at the box office, but eventually recognized as genuine cinema classics. Here's the real question that should spark some serious debate in your comments. Did Hollywood studios completely fail artists in the 1,980 seconds by not understanding visionary filmmaking? Or do audiences bear some responsibility for not showing up to see challenging original material when it first released? Drop your hottest takes below. Which of these films shocked you the most? Did you discover something you absolutely need to watch? Subscribe and hit that notification bell because we're diving even deeper into box office history and forgotten cinema masterpieces every single week.